Fire intensity. Finish them.
Before I get into this review, I want to talk about launch day issues. I was unfortunately one of the many affected by day one gremlins with Battlefront. It was so bad that it actually prevented me from playing the game entirely, and it required me to use my PS4's safe mode to rebuild its database to fix the issue, which is as scary as it sounds. Once in the game, thankfully things got a lot better, but it has soured my first impressions, and it's made me think twice about getting another DICE game at launch. Anyway, let's move on. I'm guessing by this time that you've already seen many other reviews, and I'd just like to take a moment to point out some issues I have with what some of the critics have said. One of the biggest criticisms from the gaming press is that the game doesn't have that many modes, and that Walker Assault and Supremacy are the obvious standouts. Outside of these two though, no one can agree on what other modes are good. For example, God is a Geek liked Fighter Squadron, where Giant Bomb said that it was one of the weaker modes. IGN said that Blast was totally forgettable, but I thought that it was actually kind of good. To me, this indicates how good a job that DICE have done at creating a variety of modes that have something to suit most players. Sure, there are only 9 modes, which compared to many other first-person shooters is small, but my question is, how many modes do you actually play? If you look at games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, the majority of players stick to only a handful of modes. This means that the players online at any given time aren't evenly distributed. In many cases, having less game types would actually be a good idea. It would reduce the player base being spread too thinly across multiple modes, which can be particularly frustrating when a game gets a little older and its online community shrinks. Battlefront definitely has some modes that are clearly less fun than others, but again, not everyone will think so, and at the end of the day, no one's forcing you to play every mode. My personal favourites are Fighter Squadron, Drop Zone, Walker Assault and Supremacy, although I do enjoy most of the others with the exception of Droid Run, which I think needs a serious overhaul as the first 9 minutes of each match are essentially pointless. The other criticism, that also goes hand in hand with the first one, is that the game becomes stale quickly. This will depend entirely on how you play though, and how much you enjoy the game's core gameplay, but so far I've sunk 20 plus hours into it and I'm yet to feel fatigued. Sure, it doesn't have the same level of depth in its weapon customization or character progression as other games, but Battlefront clearly isn't trying to be like those other games. I think that DICE has taken a gamble and banked on players returning to the game based on the strength of the experience alone, rather than a deep progression system. Having said that, the progression system works well. You're given 3 slots which you can fill with a variety of abilities and equipment. Everything is represented as a card, I'm not really sure why, but it's a simple system that's easy enough to understand. Most abilities can be upgraded too, and there's enough variety to create scenario-specific loadouts. My only complaint is that you can only have 2 loadouts saved at any time, which does make it difficult to create loadouts for specific scenarios, or to allow you to experiment.
Rebel troops headed our way.
Controls are tight and responsive as you would expect from a DICE game, and they have a good set of customization options as well for those who like to tweak. Vehicles are easy enough to pick up, but they offer enough depth to allow people to become very proficient. For instance, becoming a master of aerial combat requires you to become good at banking quickly so you can grab power-ups placed in tricky locations and avoid missile lock-ons. Heroes are probably the most difficult to master because they all have their own unique playstyle and abilities, but they can be incredibly devastating in the right hands. The majority of game modes have a focus on team play, and the teams that work well together will generally crush the ones that don't. Some objectives are almost impossible to achieve solo too. For example, in Fighter Squadron, trying to take down either of the 2 hero ships by yourself in a regular ship is a pretty pointless endeavour. In fact, this goes for most vehicles and turrets. It's much easier and faster to take them out when you have a few people working together. That's not to say that you can't have fun going rogue, but communicating with other players is key to victory in most scenarios, particularly against a well-organised team. Weapons are definitely a key point of difference from other shooters. For example, you don't have ammunition. Instead, guns will overheat and become briefly unusable if fired continuously for too long. Aiming down the sights in first person mode is also only possible with weapons that have a scope. It also doesn't make you more accurate, so in most scenarios shooting from the hip is just as effective. Weapons don't have any attachments to speak of either. Instead, you can equip star cards that can change the properties of your weapon for a brief period of time. I must admit I was a little bit disappointed with this at first because I'm so used to modifying weapons in other games. But after a short period of time I'd totally forgotten about it as there's so much variety once you're on the actual battlefield. No two games are alike, particularly in Walker Assault or Supremacy. One match you might predominantly be infantry and get a chance to play with a hero character and go on a tear, where in the next match you might spend most of your time in vehicles. To me, this is the biggest draw of Battlefront, because there isn't really any camping of vehicles and heroes. Chances are you'll get to use them more frequently. Sure, sometimes when an icon for something cool appears, there might be a mad rush as everyone tries to get it first, but more often than not I found the system to be pretty fair. I have noticed that there is quite a lot of overpowered things such as homing missiles, explosive shots, and the hero ships and fighter squadron. But because there are so many ridiculous things happening at any given time, I never found that any one thing to be super annoying. And without doubt, DICE will definitely be doing some balancing changes in the future.
We're about to lose a control point to the
One big surprise for me was how fun the missions are in split screen. The frame rate is cut in half, but the game still looks great and is still very enjoyable at 30 frames per second. It reminded me of how much fun it can be sitting on the couch with a mate and having a few games, which is something that I think modern gaming has kind of forgotten. As with the multiplayer, some of the mission modes are better than others, but the survival modes are actually pretty fun. These missions in general won't keep you coming back again and again, but they can give you a bit of experience with vehicles and the hero characters so you're not totally useless with them in the multiplayer. I'm not going to spend too much time covering the game's presentation because I think at this point everybody has already expressed how utterly jaw-dropping it is, both visually and with its audio. Simply put, it's not just a great looking Star Wars game, it's a great looking game period. And this is despite the fact that it doesn't run at 1080p on console. The maps are all amazingly detailed, and while there are only 4 planets available at launch, with 4 maps of varying size each, the smaller maps for each planet are actually quite unique, meaning they aren't simply smaller sections of the larger maps like in Battlefield. It certainly would be nice to have more, but with the Battle of Jakku being made available to everybody in December, and the promise of more free maps and content in the future, hopefully this won't be a problem for long. Battlefront is not a perfect shooter by any means, but judged on its own merits, it's an impressive game aesthetically and mechanically. It's not going to replace Call of Duty, Halo, or Battlefield anytime soon, but I don't think that's what this game is trying to do. Yes, it has a more casual flavour, and for some people that might make it feel shallow or light on substance. But for everyone else, this is one of the best next-gen experiences we've had yet, and definitely worth your time if you're even remotely into shooters or Star Wars.
Keep your heads down. Don't put too much faith in that hokey religion.